it's a shame that people take for granted all the hard work and energy and resources it takes to produce high quality lettuce.
Testing. 1, 2. Testing. 1, 2.
Oh, nice, nice. What conversation did
Holly isn't here.
but not for myself, but for the girl, so she could love herself. Oh, my next girl will be nothing like my ex-girl. I made mistakes back then, I'll never do it again. Oh, my next girl will be nothing like my ex-girl. It was a painful dance, now I got a second chance. You're a beautiful bird. Can't you see? Little girl's got a hold on me like glue. Baby, I'm howling for you. Yeah. Throw the ball to the stick. Swing and miss and catch us mid-strike too. Baby, I'm howling for you. Yeah. Yeah. Da-da-da-da-da. 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 Da-da-da-da-da.
Hello, everyone. Hi. I'm Josh Karp from Meltcast 2.0, and I'm here to introduce two amazing people. But before I do that, I want to thank you all for coming out here, celebrating FATALE and Ed Brubaker and his awesomeness. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Ben Blacker from the Nerdist Writers Network and Mr. Ed Brubaker.
We were talking.
Yeah. Hello? Hello? Oh, okay. Oh.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. And let's give another round of applause for Ed.
No applause. Thanks for coming out and missing the Katy Perry. Wow, my pain meds have kicked in.
It's gonna be a good night, you guys.
Yeah. Ask me anything. Want to know about Marvel? Whatever.
Yeah, we're getting into it. First of all, let's talk about Fatale. You guys have all read this, right? Applaud about it. When I say right, that means applaud.
Are you going to stand the whole time?
I might stand for a little while.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't like it?
I like it. It's just weird.
What's weird
I'm
about
wondering
it?
if I should stand.
No.
Okay.
You guys are gonna stick around and play pinball.
I shouldn't. You took my
I
pain
should
meds.
have tried your pain meds. You're gonna stick around and play ping pong, right? Against him.
That's why they're here.
Yeah.
No, I'm okay. Fine, whatever.
Yeah, you're playing.
Sandeep is my ringer.
Oh, celebrities in the crowd. Who else?
Bring it. Bring it.
Let's talk about Fatale. It's so good. So good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's my only question. Is that not? Where
You're
does
really
it-
good at this.
We talked about. It's been a while.
You had questions for Vince Gilligan. I heard it. You were like,
Well,
so.
Breaking
Walter
Bad.
White, where's
Breaking
it?
Bad's pretty great. Do you want to talk about Breaking Bad?
Yeah, let's talk about Breaking Bad.
Okay. We talked about this a little bit when last we met, but Fatale is sort of the culmination of a lot of things that you've been interested in and have researched in the past 15 years, 20 years.
20 years, yeah.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit and where this story came from and how it came to be.
Well, part of it was trying to figure out a way to do something different with noir, where I wanted to take, you know, reality and add like an extra layer onto it. And I had 12 years ago when Sean Phillips and I were finishing, or I guess not that long ago, 10 years ago when we were finishing Sleeper, I was working on this idea for a huge thing that would span the length of time. Apparently, it was a very ambitious phase. I was looking at things like Why the Last Man and going, I want to do something that could go 95 issues. And
What kind of a story was that?
it was
This aborted story.
kind of like Highlander, but good. Joan of Arc was going to be in it. It had a lot of. It was about like immortality as an idea, kind of, which is why I say Highlander, because of the Queen song. Who wants to live forever? Who wants? All right. But it was sort of looking at various archetypes throughout history, like, you know, there's always some crazy magician, or there's always some immortal hero who can't get killed, like Gilgamesh and Ulysses, and you look at these people, and hey Kyle, we just started, you didn't miss anything.
That was whole warm up.
That was the warm-up. So, oh, Sally, my chiropractor, everybody.
Oh, thanks, Sally. He's in really good shape for this. I asked him a question 2 hours ago. He's just answering it.
What was the question?
So you were working on this immortality project,
Yeah.
dealing with this seems like a vast
It's very
project.
not Ed Brubaker kind of thing. Was what it came down to. Was I couldn't figure out a way to wrap my arms around that story. It was so big, and I also, every time I'd sit down and start trying to noodle through it, it felt like I was trying to be like Neil Gaiman or somebody else.
Do you like those things?
I like a lot of stuff. I mean, I like, you know, I mean, you and I just argued about Tolkien yesterday, so.
There was no argument. I'm not into it. You're not going to win me over.
Well, okay, that's not really an argument. Then, you're right. You and I just disagreed.
We had a difference of
We had a
opinion.
difference of opinion
Yeah.
about Tolkien.
And I was
so
right.
yeah, I like, you know, I like the best in almost any genre. You know, shut up, Ben.
He doesn't mean me. He doesn't mean
Yeah,
me.
no, I don't mean him. I mean
was for the
other Ben.
podcast
Yeah.
We're going to cut all of this out.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
We'll cut
Everything you've said up till
Look at
now.
these nice posters.
Oh my God, he's so high right now. Well, so this kind of heady story, which was, you know, spanning, it would have been 100 issues. You weren't ready to tackle that.
No.
So
I put
Does-
that.
okay.
I put that aside, and then figured out what I really want to do was just do crime stories, and that's where Sean and I ended up doing Criminal. And then,
yeah,
thank you. And then over time, like, certain elements of the other thing just kept nagging at me, and one of them was the idea of the femme fatale as like an immortal archetype. And I just kept thinking,
is this something that exists, or is this something that you kind of came
it
to
was
in
something
putting
I
together
came to.
pieces?
Yeah, I just wanted to. I was looking at like archetypes of fiction and trying to figure out how to personalize them, kind of, or make them people. And the femme fatale in noir stories, the femme fatales in history of like Pulp Fiction started out as like adventurers, like Indiana Jones types, but a girl, or like a deadly woman.
Like what?
And then
Can you think of any?
one of our things, we had an article about it by my friend Jess, who's like an expert in that stuff. But during the sort of noir film days, like the femme fatale became the sort of seductive woman who makes the man do the wrong thing always, and I felt like she had become a plot device as opposed to a person. And I kept coming back to that and trying to figure out, is there a way to make the femme fatale your like sympathetic lead in a story? And then I'd also, been wanting to do something with some supernatural elements to it, and had researched a lot of stuff about weird satanic culture in the 60s and 70s and stuff like that, and wanted to sort of find a way to mix that all together. And the real genesis was when I was trying to figure out how to crack the story, and I thought, well, what if in Double Indemnity the reason that Barbara Stanwyck needed the guy from My Three Sons to save her from her husband.
You mean the Shaggy DA?
Yes, exactly. Is it Hugh Beaumont? No, that's Leave It to Beaver's dad. But if she needed him to save her from her husband because her husband was going to make her have the devil's baby or something, like what if Rosemary's Baby was like a noir, was what I was thinking. And I was like, oh, maybe that's a way in, like someone who needs to be saved for like real reasons, like because someone's going to sacrifice them to Cthulhu.
Well, what's really
which you would need a lifeline at that point, I'm thinking. Or
what's interesting though is that being the jumping off point for you, or the entry into the story. When we look at this first collection, that's not what this is about.
No.
It's not about cults in the 60s and 70s.
It's mostly about the Charlton heroes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let's not get into it.
Not our audience.
But I know you get to that stuff because I've read the next issue. But so you had to find clearly a different way into telling this story.
Yeah.
That begins with these other characters.
Yeah.
It wouldn't occur to me even to say that the Fatale is the lead in the story.
Yeah.
Or
No, that's very
line.
true. I wanted that was part of it. Was she's the through line really, but it is like an ensemble piece, and part of it is tracking her through time and all the people that she comes into contact with. She's like a ripple effect. So while she's not a plot device, she sort of is.
But she is still
She's
a
the
person.
plot.
I mean, I think you still definitely feel for her.
Yeah, I mean, she's the only really well-rounded character in it, because everyone else, once they get around her, they cease like being able to really function as a human. But yeah, it was a. I knew I wanted to do the different time periods in the story, and I knew with the first arc I really need to set everything up. So it seemed really like a no-brainer to do a noir story set in the 50s, in San Francisco, and so I used that as really the sort of the setup arc, and then the really crazy weird shit starts happening in issue 6, as you've seen.
Yes.
So.
But even these characters, while you are using archetypes, these are not, it's not the detective we've seen before. It's not the newspaper man we've seen before. Tell me about approaching these other characters who surround the Fatale.
Well, I tried to do a thing this time where every time I was writing about a character, I sort of tried to get in their head and make them the sympathetic person in the piece for just their chapter. And partly that was inspired a little bit by your favorite show, Game of Thrones. But in the books, I read the first Game of Thrones book, and what I thought was really interesting was that each character was sort of a narrator in a way, but third person. Like you'd get to this chapter and it would all be about Arya or about one of the other characters, and stuff would happen in between chapters, and you would hear about it as something that wasn't, and they're like, oh, when am I going to see that? Oh, you're never going to see it. And I kind of liked that. I liked the ballsiness of just following these narrators, so I thought I wanted to sort of try to tackle that. It seemed like a good way to try to do a thing with a big sprawling cast, really, because I tend to write too much narration, and I wanted to be able to keep doing that without having to put this, when you're doing first person narration, you can only follow one character, so.
It was interesting too that these narrators. Forget it. That's not a good question.
That's not.
Let's.
But like the corrupt cop, like the corrupt cop who seems like the bad guy at first in the story, you start to feel more sympathy for him throughout the issues. I think as you see that he's like dying of cancer, and like that he's this sort of tortured weird guy, and I mean I like that each little character can give you like a little splinter view on Josephine too.
And it fills in the backstory in a very interesting way. I mean, you talk about things happening sort of off screen or off stage, but how do you reconcile that with a comic book where things kind of have to happen on stage?
Yeah, that is true. Well, that's what flashbacks are for. Which
but
I like being able to show like a splinter of, I'm going to use the word splinter all night apparently. Just like a fragment of a flashback, and you're never going to see the rest of that story. You're never going to find out what happened to them during World War II. You're going to get little bits and pieces of a thing, but you're never going to get that whole story. You're going to have to use your own imagination to figure out, well, what the hell were they doing in Bulgaria in 1944? Like, obviously something.
And this is something you've kind of played with in varying degrees in other stuff you've written, this allusion to the past or getting maybe an image.
Yeah.
But I think you've kind of haven't splintered it quite as much as you have.
No, this is a crazy amount of sprawling nonsense. Yeah, I'm just like hoping I can pull it all together by the end.
Let's talk about that. Because you mentioned yesterday that you could see this going on and on. I mean, do you?
Yeah.
There is obviously a story that you're telling, but even in these first 6 or 7 issues, you've introduced so much world to play in. Tell me about that. How that is for you, and is there a chance you're going to chase these down?
It's definitely a chance. I keep sort of circling on it. Like I set it up. I've been kicking myself for starting it in modern times, because then we have a guy that we keep cutting back to that's in modern times, so we know eventually that these two people will meet and there'll be a story about them. And I'm thinking, how long can I stretch that out? I guess I could just kill that guy at the end of an issue, and people will be like, what the fuck is going on here?
Why did you make that choice to bookend with that contemporary story?
Well, initially it was only going to be 12 issues, and the first 4 were going to be the 50s, and the second 4 were going to be the 70s, and then the last 4 were going to be modern times. And so I thought, well, we'll have this. I wanted to set it up in modern times to sort of set the sweep of history into the story of like, oh, this, because how you meet Jo in 1955 and she's just who she is. It's like if you haven't met her 70 years in the future and she looks exactly the same, you don't really, unless I want to draw it out, really, So that was kind of part of it, was to help set the tone, and also to just really imply that there's a huge amount of story to be uncovered in this sort of mystery.
Have you found yourself going down avenues that you didn't expect in the storytelling?
Yeah. I mean, I have this huge notebook that I've been writing all my ideas down, and I'm not being able to get to a lot of them. And I had no idea what was going to happen in issue 5 when I was like writing issue 4. I had like a bunch of notions of where it would go, but then when I started writing issue 5, I was like, I need a cool location, and then I was like, oh, the Cliff House, and then I suddenly that whole scene appeared to me, and I was like, oh, great. So
that's insane that you didn't know what was coming.
Well, I knew there had to be an end. There had to be a big like fight of some sort.
Yeah, it's a comic book. But so this is kind
sex,
of
violence.
Sure, it's a noir.
Tentacles.
But this leads me to sort of a bigger question about how.
Someone finally got the weirdness of that sentence.
I've moved on. How these comics are put together.
A type of manga to you.
It leads me to ask about how these comics are put together, and how it differs maybe from. It's different from working for one of the major companies. What kind of autonomy are you given? Did you have to pitch this story to anyone?
No.
Really?
No.
So how did you get to do it? Who do you think you are?
I'm just someone who's really lucky. What happened was I was at dinner with Robert Kirkman after I was down here visiting, and went by the Walking Dead writers' room for a while, and then we went out to dinner, and he was basically just like, come on, you've been promising you'd bring a book to Image, and I can do a better Robert Kirkman than this. Come on, man, you've been promising you're gonna bring a book to Image, and so I basically he's like, what's your next book? And I'm like, well, it's gonna be this thing called Fatale, and blah blah blah. And he said, why don't you do that at Image? And I'm like, well, what will you guys give us? So it was like, we just negotiated over dinner like what the terms would be, and then I was like, all right, well, let me see, what I can do. And
Were you thinking this would be another Icon project?
Well, technically, my contract at the time, I had to. There was negotiation back and forth between the companies, basically, so I had to, let them sort of offer on it as well, because my deal at the time. But yeah, it ended up being that Image was willing to do things that other places weren't. Because Image really wanted to get us over there, and so they were willing to do, like 5 pages in the catalog and like posters, and they really pushed the hell out of it.
Yeah.
So, which I'm really relieved that we ended up doing it that way. But yeah, no, I didn't have to like pitch it to anybody or anything, and literally, I mean, there's no way we could do this book at like even Vertigo or something, like the way that we do it, because I am often hello Jim. No. Jim McCann, everybody. This is being podcasted. Hi, podcast.
Why couldn't you even do it at Vertigo? How does that stuff work?
Because often, last issue was different in that I was finished with the whole script before Sean started drawing it, because he was working on a French graphic novel in between books. But generally, I'm often sending Sean anywhere from 4 to 8 pages at a time. And they just go directly to him, and he letters, pencils, and inks, and sends it directly to our colorist, who, colors the whole book, like a week or 2 before it goes to print. And there's no editorial process involved there. I mean, you could not do a book where you sent 4 pages to the artist, like your writer, your editors. I have done, 5 to 10 pages in at a time working on Marvel books when you're really crunched on deadline. But yeah, just I never have. Sean doesn't know what's coming next ever. Like, he doesn't want to. I've offered to tell him. But
yeah, I was going to ask about that collaboration. I mean, you guys have been working together for quite a while now.
Yeah, 13 years.
Damn.
Yeah. He's never wanted to know what's coming next. I'll tell him what the gist of the idea is for the book. Like, the next one's about blah, blah, blah. Like, for Criminal, I remember when we got to Bad Night, I'm like, yeah, the next one's going to be about the cartoonist guy. He's like, okay. Like, that's, he's like the first reader, basically. And, luckily he appears to like the job, because we've been doing it for 13 years.
How did you guys start working together? Maybe this is well trod, but I don't know. Sean actually came in and inked something. My first thing I did at Vertigo was this thing called Scene of the Crime. And Michael Lark didn't like his own inking after the first issue, and so he asked Sean to ink it. And Sean and I at some point communicated during that, and he let me know he'd been a fan of my own work when I was a cartoonist. I used to do sort of semi-autobiographical comics about being a slacker loser. And so he was like, oh, we should do something together someday. And I thought, oh yeah, sure, that's never going to happen. And then I wrote a thing for DC called Gotham Noir that was like a Batman Elseworlds. And it was going to be drawn. No, it was. I don't think we had an artist in mind, actually. I sold it to them, and then we just started kicking ideas around. And the editor said, "Well, what about Sean Phillips?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then we did that together, and we really liked working together. And then, like a year later, I was working on a project at Wildstorm called Sleeper, and I had just sort of sold them the pitch on it. And Sean had been doing Wildcats there at the time. And so I asked the editor, I was like, well, what do you think of Sean? And then we sent Sean the like 2-page pitch for it, and he did character sketches. And, pretty much ever since then, we've just been working together. Like, we've had a few minor breaks here and there where he's gone off and worked on other shit, but mostly his only shit is my shit. And I'm sure he'd be proud to hear that.
Yeah. He won't listen to this.
And have you guys... Have
he
you
has
guys
no interest
pretty
in me.
much? Well, clearly he doesn't care what's happening in the next issue.
Yeah, he's like, whatever, just.
I'm actually curious about that, and maybe you can answer it, maybe not. But like, what is he getting out of this? Because he must be somewhat.
He gets paid.
He must be somewhat invested in the story, but he can't be.
Well, he's a comic. I mean, he was a fan of my writing before we started working together, so I think he's gets to work with me. No, I think he must like the stuff that I give him to draw. Mainly is like he and I have the same kind of taste in the stories that we want to tell. I think, which are a lot of stories with a lot of shadows and people standing around and.
Yeah, let's talk about those stories for a minute, because you said earlier that kind of epic story that you had in your head that you were working on was not a Brubaker story.
Yeah.
So what is? What defines it, do you think?
Low sales. I tend to write stories about people that have fucked up shit in their past, because I have a lot of fucked up shit in my past. I think, people were saying my stuff was noir before I was actually even trying to write stuff that was noir, I think.
What was it that people were responding to, do you think? In that way. Was it there's more than just fucked up shit in someone's past.
I
There's
don't know.
a terseness of language.
I don't know what people like about what I do, honestly.
But why do you think they were calling it noir? I don't care if they liked it or not.
I think just the tone of what I do, the way, it's a lot of people in the shadows, a lot of people making bad decisions that then the whole story spins out of kind of this one bad decision. And, I went through, I made a lot of bad decisions when I was young around like drugs and crime and stuff like that. And I think I'm just kind of, I have recurring nightmares to this day still. I think I'm claustrophobic because of a few days I had to spend in the felony tank when I was 18. So I still to this day will like wake up from nightmares that I'm like in prison. And I did some stuff that could have gotten me, I could have had a whole different life if I hadn't gotten lucky and gotten out of some stuff. And I think I just am kind of drawn to that kind of thing, like people who made mistakes, but they're still sort of good people, or they think they are, even while they're like murdering people.
Well, let's talk
murderers
about
are
that.
people too.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
That's my next project.
I'm gonna.
Kid murderers are people too.
Let's talk about that in relation to Fatale. Are these good people? What's going on in this story? How do you
There
feel
are
about
no
these
good
people?
people.
Are you allowed? Can you as a writer judge the characters though?
I think so, because I've had this argument with Greg Rucka before. Well, not really an argument; it's more of a difference of opinion. He likes Tolkien.
He likes Tolkien. Yeah.
No, we both do. He does much meaner shit to his characters than I do, and I realize I have kind of a weak stomach for stuff. Like I've never had a female character in one of my stories get raped, just because it seems like distasteful. And also it's just
Does it seem distasteful?
This seems distasteful. I'm not 100% sure. It feels like it would be a bad thing. But no, honestly, I don't have the stomach for that to be. And you want to be mean to your characters to some degree, because that's one of the tenets of writing good fiction is put your characters in places they don't want to be and have awful shit happen to them and have them figure out how they're going to survive it. And that's where a lot of my writing comes from, is like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen today? But I can't go too far on some of this stuff. I'm kind of a pussy about it, I think. I'm not willing to be as mean to some of my characters as other writers are.
Well, and it sounds like, you can't be judging them too harshly, because you
I get
must
inside
have
their
affection
heads.
for them.
Yeah, exactly. I made the Kingpin sympathetic in Daredevil when I was working on him. He's like a mass murderer. I was like, but he needs love.
Yeah, how do you approach a character like that who's been around forever and was basically turned into a monster, right, in the run before you?
He was not. I just had him move to Spain and live near the ocean and try to get away from it all. Everybody wants to escape something, That's
even
kind
the
of
Kingpin.
Yeah, that's kind of getting back to it. That's kind of what all my writing is about. And I think that's the beauty of. I think that's part of what I'm drawn to noir about. Is that it's all about people wanting to escape something, either escape being accused of murder or escape, I'm pretending to be a completely different person. Stealing someone's identity, that kind of, I love all those kind of stories. So I think that's easy for me to imagine, the Kingpin having gone through everything that he's done and still consider himself, a good person at heart, or maybe not a good person, but like a person, you know, because I don't think anyone's really good or bad, except for Hitler. Hitler was bad. Just saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to get that on the record, though.
FYI, Hitler, Manson, bad people. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Marvel?
No. Do you want to talk about Marvel? My pain meds have kicked in. Yeah, sure. What do you want to know? What do you got?
How are we doing these days?
How are we doing?
I told you this yesterday. I look forward to your Captain America I buy the collection every time.
Someone didn't read my interview.
I enjoy it.
I just am writing my last issue of that right now.
Let's talk about that.
All right.
Why leave? I mean, it's been 9 years, right? Or it will be 9 years.
It'll be 8 years.
Well, it seems longer.
It seems like 9. It seems like 15.
Yeah.
No, honestly, it was just time to go. I'm kind of, you know, I said this a couple weeks ago when I was being interviewed, that I just felt like, and I talked to people at Marvel about this for the last several months, that I just felt like I never imagined I would do superhero comics as long as I did. And when I came into comics, I came in from alternative comics, and I wrote a mystery comic at Vertigo, and Mike Carlin said, well, if you can write a mystery, you can write Batman. And I thought, oh, you're full of it. And then I watched all these Bruce Timm and Paul Dini Batman cartoons, and I was like, well, these are amazing. So I was like, well, maybe I could. And I started pitching ideas to Batman, and had an editor there.
To Batman?
Yeah. What they
Bill,
don't tell
how
you
is
is
that
Batman
medication?
actually runs the Bat Office.
Really?
Yes, it's the Bat Office at DC is run out of the Bat Cave. Yeah, which is how DC has been able to keep going all this time. It's a grant from the Wayne Foundation. It certainly isn't sales.
So you sort of.
I mean, other than Watchmen, which has sold millions.
We're not gonna even. I was not even going to bring up Watchmen.
Why not?
But you sort of stumbled into superheroes via crime,
Yeah.
then Batman. Then
I was like, I hadn't actually read superhero comics for about 10 years before I did Batman, and I remember I was writing my first issue of Batman, and I went into the comic store in San Francisco, and I was like, what good has been going on in superhero comics since the last 10 years? And they just gave me like the authority in Planetary, and basically were like, here, this stuff. And so I was reading it, and I was like, wow, this is kind of amazing, actually. Like, oh, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And I thought, well, the storytelling has really come a long way. And so, but the minute I got into Batman, even Greg Rucka and I started talking, we were immediately like trying to figure out how we could write these things without Batman in there. We were like, can we just write about the cops? And it took us 3 years to convince them to do Gotham Central. So, and by then, the way we convinced them was that Powers had happened and was a huge hit, and we were like, hey, see, someone else is doing it, and we could do ours with Batman. People would care. Yeah. Powers actually sold better. That was an odd thing, doing a book like that at DC, because it wasn't Vertigo and it wasn't really fully DC, and they did not know how to promote it. The head of promotions at DC, the month that Gotham Central was being solicited, told me, this is my favorite comic we've published in 10 years. And I was like, oh, awesome, are we getting the cover of previews? And he said, oh no, that's going to Aquaman. And I was like, okay, like, everybody there loved it.
Did they leave you guys alone on it because they didn't know quite what it was?
No, they left us alone on the stuff that they knew what it was, even. I mean, there's not a lot of hands-on. Well, there is now at DC, I think, from everything I've heard from friends. But my experience at both DC and Marvel has been pretty hands-off. I mean, the worst thing that ever happened to me at DC was like my editor was on jury duty, and Dan DiDio hired like a new artist for Catwoman without consulting anybody, and it was like, that's what we call getting DDO'd. I don't work there anymore, so whatever.
What was the best thing that happened to you there?
Working with Michael Lark and Greg Rucka, meeting Sean Phillips and working with him. I got a lot of breaks there. I have really no complaints other than that one thing. I was treated really well there. I got paid to write, and I got to write things that were a lot of fun. And, Gotham Central is more popular now than when Greg and I were doing it. So it's kind of weird. And it's they put out like deluxe editions of it, and, it's been through multiple printings of various formats of paperbacks and hardbacks. And so, I had good experiences there, and, I learned a lot about writing under deadline and you know, I look back at the first comics I did for DC, and I just cringe at how many words are in every word balloon. It's just like, oh God, follow the rules, Brubaker. 25 words a balloon.
Wait,
max.
are those the rules?
Something like that. Yeah.
Tell me some more rules.
Do you want rules? For
Yeah,
comic
we're
book
writing our first comic book.
Okay.
So I'd like to know some.
Well, what you want to do, this is very technical for those of you technical people. The trick to comic book writing for dialogue is you want to write a line of dialogue that when you're reading it in your head it sounds like something someone says, but if you were to say it out loud you'd realize like, oh, that's kind of abbreviated. It needs to read like dialogue while not actually being what people would say, because if it was what someone would say, the word balloon is going to be way too big. Basically, the way I tricked myself into it was I indent like the first tab, and then I write like the name of the character, and then if I can't fit the dialogue all into one line, I'll allow myself to go 2 or 3 words into the next line. But otherwise, like you know, you labor over it to try to like get those lines exactly right so that you're using as few words as possible. It's almost like poetry in a weird way, where you're trying to say a lot with very little. You know, I mean, that's the thing, going from comics to screenwriting or like TV writing. Man, it's so freeing to be able to just, yeah, whatever, like monologue. Aaron Sorkin could not survive in comics. Though Brian Bendis has gotten away with it. So.
Are there writers, comic book writers, that you think do that really well, who you would hold up as a model for that kind of dialogue writing specifically?
For making it seem like dialogue, well, Bendis actually writes a lot more like a Mamet or a Sorkin or something, where there's a ton of word balloons on the page. I think he's about the only guy who's made that style work, because he does his own balloon placement. He used to do his own lettering, so he actually knew how to structure these things as conversations, whereas I can't do that. I tried it once as a parody of him, just to see what it would look like in an issue of Daredevil. I had these characters in Daredevil that were... one of the things I really loved about Frank Miller's Daredevil was Turk and Grotto, the sidekick characters. Anybody remember Frank Miller's Daredevil? 2 people. Wow. But they had like comic relief, and I wanted some comic relief, and I was friends with Patton Oswalt and Brian Posehn, and I knew they were big comic book nerds, and so I thought I will put them in the comic, and one of them will talk like a Bendis character, and one of them will talk like a Frank Miller character. So it's all like short, one-word things, and the other one just goes on and on and on and on and on. And that was Patton's character, was like the neurotic, talking a ton. And so I tried to do that, and I could never fit like as many word balloons into a panel as Brian does. I don't know how. It's like some mystery skill he has, because no one else can do it. But as far as like dialogue, right? I mean, Brian Vaughn is amazing at it. You know, Jim McCann sitting here, he's really good at it.
Prove it.
Prove it. Yeah, write some
Quick.
dialogue. You have 4 seconds.
He points to the store.
Yeah. Someone just handed you a pen and paper. Awesome. It's hard to think off the top of my head. I think Rucka writes really good dialogue. I mean, it's a weird one. It's, you know, the guys who are really successful, you look at their stuff and you realize they're doing it, kind of.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's talk about some of the other rules you discovered along the way. I'm endlessly fascinated by this. This is really, it's a foreign language to us. We're having to learn a whole new
way
that's
coming
writing.
from screenwriting or even theater writing. Like, you have to isolate each moment in comics.
Yeah.
Like, those panels are Jim, are you trying to steal her purse? That was a lot of screenwriters I know who've come over to write comics will call me and they'll be like, how do you do this? Like, and I'm like, what are you talking about? You write this, you write scenes. Like, no, but you have to isolate each section, and like I can't just go, he walks down the street. I have to be like, he's standing at the corner of blah blah blah, and there's a car, and it's like, yeah, you kind of have to do that. So it's almost like being a storyboarder or a director at the same time as being a writer. So you just kind of learn that stuff. I mean, one of the tricks that I always recommend to people is either, depending on what the scene is, like if it's an action scene, like write all the panel descriptions first and then go back in and figure out what you need people to say. And if it's like a dialogue scene, just write all the dialogue and then figure out, okay, I need 5 to 7 panels on this page. what happens, where are the breaks, and sometimes you'll end up jettisoning a bunch of dialogue because you're like, oh, I don't have room for this. Well, what's important? And so it's a process. Comic book writing sort of makes you, when you do it right, it's bulletproof, because you have to get each scene right before you move on to the next one. And I think it's something that's really helped me with like screenwriting, because I tend to go over, when I sit down the next morning to start working on a screenplay again, I go over everything I wrote the day before and just sort of streamline it and cut it and redo stuff and go, oh, that line of dialogue is terrible. And, so I'll just sit there for a couple hours doing that before I start moving forward. And I just I assume every scene needs to be completely bulletproof. It slows me down a lot because, a lot of screenwriters just plow through this shit and then go, oh, I'll fix it all in the second draft. But for me, when I'm like, whatever I'm turning in, I want it to be as tight as humanly possible. And then it's like, well, maybe we don't need a second draft.
I'm sure that'll happen.
Yeah, that's totally.
They shoot.
Leonardo DiCaprio was like, this is perfect.
Let's talk a little bit.
I don't. Yeah, I'm on pain meds. I don't.
Let's talk a minute
It might have
about.
been Leonardo DiCaprio. I can't remember.
Let's talk a minute about the that transition to other kinds of writing. I mean, you say it is freeing in some ways.
Yeah. It's different.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges as far as approaching story?
Well, I like to turn things in 5 pages at a time. So
I'm sure people enjoy.
That's a different thing. I come partly from a school of having just done so much comics that I tend to write without a net a little bit. Like I have outlines and stuff, but I don't follow them all the time. And like I did a TV pilot for Fox like a year and a half ago, and the hardest part for me wasn't the pitch or selling the show or even writing the script. The hardest part was the outlining, because I had to do these scene-by-scene things, which were boring the hell out of me.
And you have to stick to them.
And you have to stick to them once you get them done. Well, you don't have to once you get into the rewrites. You can like start jettisoning shit that didn't work, but you make them say that it didn't work. You figure out a way to like. It's when I used to be an artist and I would do like illustration work. The odd times that I did it, we had the big nose rule when you like knew an art director, because art directors will always ask for change even if your drawing's exactly what they wanted. So you'd do something that was just like you draw someone's hand really weird or big, because they'd have that one thing to go, oh, this is great, except that hand is weird, man. Can you fix that hand? So that you got to figure out how to do that in your TVs, in your pilot scripts too. You'd be like, throw in that one scene where you're just like, wait, why are they at La Brea Tar Pits? No, I'm just kidding.
Can you talk about that experience with that pilot at all?
Sure. That was for 20th Century Fox. My at the time manager had there was a writer that they had an overall with who was interested in one of my books, and so these guys at 20th started looking at some of my material, and they wanted to option one of my books to try to make a TV show out of it, and I said no, because I was too attached to it, and I just didn't think it would go forward, and they didn't want me to write it. And then this guy Mark Ambrose, who was like a junior executive there, was a big fan of mine, and he said, well, why don't we bring in Ed and see if he's got any like original ideas? And so my manager and I went out to breakfast, and he's like, so do you have any TV ideas? And so I kicked around like 3 or 4 ideas with him over breakfast, and then we went in.
Let me interrupt for 1 sec. How did you differentiate those TV ideas from a comic idea? Or did you have to?
Oh yeah, totally. Well, my feeling is kind of each idea needs to work for the medium that it's supposed to be in, and I watch a ton of TV. I'm like my TV was my babysitter because my mom was an alcoholic. And
so what's your excuse now? Why is it your babysitter?
I had a really hot babysitter. No, I don't know. I love television as a medium. I think, when I think back to, happy times in my life, a lot of it is like sitting there watching like the Mary Tyler Moore Show with my dad or something. And, I think TV is great for long form entertainment. I love serialized fiction, and TV can do things that, comics does similar things to TV in that it's serialized, but you can have a lot of scenes in a room in TV, and you don't want to do that in a comic. You want to keep changing the location. You want more interesting visuals, and you've only got 25 pages an issue if you're lucky. So yeah, this was ideas I had specifically for like the TV show that I pitched was a thing that I had like a couple seasons figured out and some single episode ideas, and it was going to be like a hybrid. This was the year where all the networks claimed that they were trying to sort of meet cable in the middle somewhere. They were going to do a bunch of stuff that was going to be more cable-like, and that was the show that I was up against that they ended up filming instead of my pilot at the end was Breakout Kings, which they didn't pick up anyway, and then got sold to cable and did a couple seasons on A&E, but they had made the pilot so they could do that. It's funny because every time I'm talking to the people, I'm working with these guys again this season, and we keep circling around ideas, and then there's always this moment where I'm like, why can't we just do the one that I sold you guys like a year and a half ago? like everybody really likes that one. I had lunch with the guy from Fox, who's like one of the two like main guys there, and he's like, I love that pilot. I'm like, yeah.
But they don't like to do that.
I don't know what the deal is. It's weird. That's the one thing that I didn't like about the process. I really enjoyed like pitching and selling, and I didn't really love the outlining as much, just because it wasn't something I was used to.
Can you talk about what the concept was? Are you allowed to do that?
I don't know. Actually,
Let's tell them, and we can cut it out.
Am I allowed? Julian? Yeah. My agents are. It was a thing that was about a kind of a flip on a procedural, where I was trying to figure out a new way to do a procedural show, and it was about crimes that happen within the underworld, the criminal underworld, and who solves these crimes. So it was about a corrupt cop who gets hired by like a crime syndicate to solve murder, and sort of ends up becoming like the sheriff of the mob was sort of the premise, and I still think it's a great idea. It is, because you could have your like Die Hard episode where it's like he has to go to some meeting with the triad, and it's at like an underground casino, and a bunch of people invade to rob it, and he's got to get his mob princess out in time or whatever. There's a lot of things you could do within that world, I thought, and so I pitched that to 20th, and everybody really liked it, and we developed it, and I sort of learned quickly the ropes of how to develop a pitch into something you can take into the networks, and then we took it to Fox. And conveniently, Matt Chernis was the head of Fox Drama that year, who I knew through comic books a little bit, and we'd played Xbox games together and been on the phone, and he was like friends with other people I knew, so it was like I'd never actually met him before, but you couldn't have walked into a more friendly room. And this was probably the last week of pitch season, and it was my first time going into something like this, and I already had a full-time job writing, so like. And I knew I was going to the friendliest room of all time, and I thought, well, if this doesn't happen, like this is not going to happen, for one thing. Like I knew for sure I was not going to sell this thing, because it was too much something I actually wanted to do. And I was like, oh, this would be a great TV show. No way they're going to buy it. So I went in and I pitched it, and Matt made a suggestion. I said, and then the cliffhanger ending of the first season is this. And he said, oh, that's great. Why don't we do that at the end of the pilot? And I said, well, buy the show, and I'll put it at the end of the pilot. and the producers I was with at 20th said, no one's ever said that before. And I was like, well, that's what we're here to do, is to make a deal, right? Like,
make it easy for them.
So I walked out, and he basically said, okay, I think I want this, but I got to check a couple things. And, we got the phone call while we were actually at ABC, waiting to pitch it to ABC the next morning. We had just been brought into the conference room for the pitch, and like my producer at 20th kept looking at his phone and waiting for something. He's like, I was really hoping we weren't going to even have to do this pitch, and like ABC's never going to buy this show. And I'm like, oh great, thanks, I'm glad we're here. and then literally they let us in, and my manager and the producer's phones just like went off immediately. And they were like, Fox just bought the show. And I was like, awesome, let's leave. And then the door opened, and the people from ABC came in, and I'm like, what do I do now?
Was that like a 4-minute pitch?
Yeah, it was like the worst pitch of all time, because it was like, what was funny was they were like, wow, I can't believe Fox let this leave the room. And then I was like, yeah, well, they're thinking about it. Like, so it was interesting. And then, you know, it was fun because I threw myself into it, and with TV, you write so fast. And it was the end of pitch season, so they were already getting scripts that they'd sold, that had been bought in July and August. And they were seeing like, oh, like, so they'd bought, I could sell a procedural late in the game because they'd already gotten scripts for ones, and they were like, oh, we're not going to make this, so they were still in the market. Like, so a month earlier, I probably wouldn't have been able to sell that show because it would have been, you know, too much like something else they had, maybe. So, and then they didn't make it, and but the script got around, and a lot of people, you know, wanted me to do stuff. So
you're working on some new stuff.
Yeah.
Good.
Got a couple.
We won't talk about
things.
those.
No,
But that's great.
They don't exist yet.
Do you guys have questions for Ed? You must. If you have a question, just come on down here. Celebrity audience, do you guys have questions also?
Celebrity audience. All right.
Come over here. We have to get you on the microphone.
Ben will tell you not to touch his microphone. Don't touch my mic.
Ed, I was just wondering, what did you think of The Dark Knight?
The comic or the movie? Oh, Dark Knight. I definitely like that one. I like Batman Begins pretty well. Chris Nolan's like my favorite director, so I feel weird because I feel like the Batman movies are his worst movies, actually. But they're still great. It's like I love Inception and The Prestige, and Memento is like my favorite film ever. So I'm kind of harsh on those movies in this weird way. But no, I liked it. It did feel like, you know, there's a scene. I got to go to an early critics screening of that, and it was my first IMAX movie ever. And I'm afraid of heights, so that's like a great one to start with, like the. But there's like the scene when the Joker's in the interrogation booth. I was like, holy shit! Like I practically wrote that scene, and it was nice. Paul Levitz, who was in charge of DC at the time, actually used to send you money if he thought that there were fingerprints of your comics in any of the Warner Brothers movies. I don't know if that will happen anymore now that he's not there, because the check came with an enormously long letter about how they didn't have to do this. It was just they were just being nice, and it had nothing to do with anything you actually did. But it was cool because it was like, oh, cool, free money for. I met Chris Nolan a couple years ago, and he clearly like knew who I was, and I talked to. A friend of mine knows him pretty well, and was like, oh yeah, he really was into Gotham Central. So I know he and his brother both read Gotham Central, so that was a lot of fun to see.
What did you think of Green Lantern?
Oh wait, initially the girl in Dark Knight, she was Renee Montoya originally, yeah, and then Paul Levitz actually refused to let them have her be Montoya because Montoya would never turn against Gordon. So I thought that was interesting. Like,
That's really interesting.
Other questions? Do you want to ask his opinion on other things? He'll give them.
I'm totally high. Whatever. What do I think of?
This might have been answered already. I just read Dead Enders for the first time recently.
Oh, thanks.
And it was awesome. I loved it. But so again, this might have been answered at some point. But how come we never wrote something like that ever again? Because that was great.
Yeah, that was great. Why haven't you written something great?
That might actually have the best ending for anything I ever wrote. That was a weird one. That
Dead Enders was really cool.
Thanks.
I remember that. I forgot about that. Thank you.
That probably, of anything I've written, had the most sort of editor's hands in it. Not in a bad way necessarily, but in that, like, that started with, I did a mini-series at Vertigo called Scene of the Crime, and then I wanted to do a monthly, and they had just bought 100 Bullets, so they didn't want another crime monthly. And I said, well, what are you guys looking for? And Shelley said, well, Karen really wants us to do some kind of a teen Love and Rocketsy kind of thing. And I thought, well, I can do that. And so it initially was going to be a revamp of Swing with Scooter as a post-apocalyptic thing, because Swing with Scooter was DC's Archie ripoff, basically. And then they wouldn't let me do that, and so we ended up calling it Dead Enders, and I created a bunch of new characters. But the pitch started as like 2 pages, and then they kept just being on the fence about it. And by the time it got approved, there was like a 28-page document that outlined like 45 issues of stories or something. And I keep having to go in for these meetings, and it started out as just being a story about a bunch of kids, and then they ended up wanting a plot. And then it ended up with this whole Joseph Campbell hero myth thing that I really wasn't that attached to. But, you know, I flipped through the book when I got my box the other day of them, and I hadn't looked at that stuff in a decade. And I was reading it, and there's 5 or 6 issues in there that I think are some of the best stuff I ever wrote. Like there's a romance comic issue that was, and then I think the last issue where the world's all sort of split apart, and you know, it tells a bunch of short stories about all these characters is probably the best ending for anything I've ever written, actually. So I guess I just never did anything like that because I felt like too old to write things about young people at that point. Like I was already in my early 30s at that point, and I had really, really, really wanted to do a crime thing, but Brian Azzarello got there like 5 minutes before me. So fuck him.
How do you feel about 100 Bullets?
Oh, I love 100 Bullets.
Okay. How do you feel about the Avengers movie?
Oh, the Avengers movie was like a lot of fun. No, I really loved it. I went to the premiere, and it was I saw you there. It was awesome. I walked out of the theater. Remember, I got yelled at on Twitter that night for saying it was going to be the biggest movie of the year. Fuck you, Twitter. It is.
Other questions? Yeah.
Speaking of movies, other than the books that you've written, what book series of comic books would you like to write for if you were assigned feature film screenwriting?
What do you? Oh, what comic would I want to adapt into a film? I don't know, actually.
Including yours.
Gotham Central. I would love to do a Gotham Central TV show. I mean, we were just ripping off Homicide: Life on the Street anyway, but hey, I got to meet Tom Fontana. Probably Gotham Central. I mean, if I'm going to be like, I don't have a huge. The only book that I love so much that I want to see if I could get the rights to make it into a movie is this old book called The Far Cry. By a guy who used to write episodes of Twilight Zone and stuff, whose name I'm just drawing a blank on right now. He's like one of Dwayne Swarzynski's favorite writers, and that's like about a guy who had a nervous breakdown who, in the late 40s, is asked by a friend to help him research a true crime, and he just sort of becomes obsessed with the victim, and you know, it's exactly right up my alley. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have that Jones yet, you know.
Other questions? Yeah.
So with Criminal, with Lastly Innocent, I think you set the bar super ultra high, and I wanted to know what's kind of next for Criminal. Are you going to take a break from it and focus on Fatale for now, or I just was curious?
Yeah, well, Fatale is going somewhere around 15 or 16 issues as of now, and then the plan is to go back to Criminal after that. But yeah, that did kind of set the bar so high that I almost feel like I don't know if we can go back. But I have the plan is for the next Criminal story to be Coward's Way Out, which is the Leo in prison story, which is the sequel to the first Criminal arc. So, and assuming the movie goes forward, then we will definitely go back and do that sequel. Oh, celebrity question, Jim McCann.
So in your interview and what you've been talking about over the past, I guess, 24 or 48 hours is that, you know, you've not run out, but you've kind of run your own personal limit of superhero stories, which is something that, you know, I know a lot of people have talked about. And you've been doing noir. What other genre? Is there like something that, an itch that you want to scratch?
Yeah, well, Becky Cloonan and I were talking about doing a miniseries of romance comics where I would write all the stories and she would draw them all in different styles. Like each story would be like three stories per issue, like an old like Romita romance comic. I've always loved that stuff. I don't read romance novels. I do watch dumb rom-coms, which my wife makes fun of me for watching all the time. By the way, I saw Fuck Buddies, but it was called No Strings Attached by the time I saw it. Yeah, see, not good. No, not a really great movie. Fuck Buddies was awesome. No, I watch, but it's weird. Romance comics, for some reason, because I think I just read them when I was a teenager, like reading Archie comics, and I just blended them in my head with like John Romita's Spider-Man comics. There's like, oh, it's like this is what happens when he's not Spider-Man. Is like Gwen Stacy goes on a date with some other dude. But yeah, I just have always wanted to do that. I have a big, I don't only want to write crime, so yeah, definitely would. I like soap opera stuff, Not like you like soap opera. I'm not David Sedaris, but I don't watch One Life to Live. But I mean, I made Jim cry.
More
Western.
Yes. I would like to read your Western.
I would love to do
cool.
a Western.
Yeah.
So I guess I missed the big interview, and you may have already talked about this. But so you're done with Captain America. But what about Bucky, who's kind of your baby?
I'm keeping the Winter Soldier. Once Cap 19 is my last issue of Cap, and then after that, Winter Soldier is like my only monthly book for Marvel, and as long as that lasts, basically. So keep buying it if you want to keep it around. I'm hoping if it's my only book, more people will buy it.
Speaking of
all those shattered Cap fans.
Speaking of other genres, that pulpy stuff in Captain America and Winter Soldier, it's sort of sideways version of a lot of the noir stuff. It's kind of concurrent with it, but it's certainly not the same territory. Is that stuff that you have as an influence as well?
Yeah, well, a lot of that stuff is like influences by my dad, like books he would read or movies he would take us to as a kid.
Like what kind of things?
Well, like John le Carre kind of stuff. My dad was always reading le Carre and any of those spy novels really. My dad was for a while was the head of naval intelligence in Vietnam, and my uncle was in the CIA, and so there's a lot of like that kind of world around in our life. I used to, when my dad was on his deathbed, I got as many seasons of NCIS as I could get the DVDs for, and that's all because it was his only show he wanted to watch, and he would just sit there and tell you everything that was wrong. So
it's an amazing gift.
Yeah, exactly. When he was in it, it was called the NIS. It was the Naval Intelligence Service, so it was just NIS. But he was in Vietnam for like 3 or 4 years, just basically like being a cop, and and sort of liaising with his brother, who was like the head of the CIA's Mekong Delta.
Have you pitched that show? That's a good show.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, it is.
The Vietnam show. Are we ready for Vietnam? Yeah, MASH. You're right, MASH, but it's about the CIA.
Ed, you've produced your Marvel output to Winter Soldier, not just because of the creative decision, but you said in the Spurgeon interview, because you're able to sustain yourself now on your creator-owned work. And a lot of other creators have been talking about how they're stepping back from Marvel and DC, like Paulo Rivera.
Yeah.
Talked about how he worked for 10 years, and retirement is still not really like a thing in his life. I wanted to know, what do you think of the lay of the land with respect to the big two economically for creators? Do they have to make things more equitable to keep? There's like a lot of high-profile defections to Image, like yourself and Morrison and stuff like that. What's your take on all that?
Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. Well, I think, like I said in the Spurgeon interview, once you get to a point where you're established in the field, you can own your own stuff outright. I mean, it's not easy to get to the point where you're selling well enough to quit needing other paychecks, but it does happen, and I feel like it's, you have to take a gamble on yourself once in a while, and I've made a really good living writing comics for DC, and I made a better living writing comics for Marvel, and I was treated really well by both of those companies, overall, and it just got to the point where I just didn't have any more stuff I really wanted to do in that field, and the creator-owned thing, Fatale taking off so well at Image really, really helped me be able to make that decision, but I probably would have just done it anyway, just because I can't keep writing comics that I didn't want to write. Like, I never wanted to get to a point with Captain America where I was sitting there writing an issue and going like, God, I can't wait to be done with this. And so I wanted to leave before that became a thing. I think both of those publishers pay really well. If you know what you're getting into when you're doing it, if you want to write comics, and you want to write superhero comics, there's no reason to write them anywhere but Marvel and DC. No one, they're not going to sell anywhere else, for one thing. Independent superhero comics generally don't sell that well. So if you want to write that stuff, that's definitely the place to go and do it. But you got to know going in the history of the way those companies were formed. What I thought was amazing in the last 6 months or so is the amount of talk within the industry about creators' rights and things that none of us ever really talked about anymore, because we always assumed these are just settled issues, and Marvel and DC both have creator equity for if you create new characters for them and things like that. So it's not the same deal that Jack Kirby got, or that Steve Ditko got, or that Siegel and Schuster got. So when people were saying, well, how can you work there even though Jack Kirby got screwed over or whatever, and it's like, well, that's like saying, how can you work at an auto plant because the people who worked there 50 years ago had a shittier deal than you? Like, they've seen the error of their ways and they've changed it. So, but it's, I think it comes to a point when you get to a point as a creator where you just want to write the stuff you want to write, and I mean, I always kind of wrote the stuff I wanted to write anyway, and it just got to the point where now the stuff I want to write isn't Marvel or DC superheroes, and it happens to be selling well enough that I don't need to figure out another path. And also, I have movie and TV deals and stuff, so that really helps. But I would do it anyway.
Before we wrap up, we've touched on it a little bit, but what comics are you reading these days, and also what TV are you watching, and what are you putting in your eyes? And
putting in my eyes. Callback.
But not to tonight.
Yeah, no, to like yesterday. Whatever. Inside joke theater. Yeah, Ben got it. Comics. My favorite comics right now. I'm not a. God, there's so many good comics.
You can leave some out.
Casanova. I know I'm gonna totally leave out comics because I'm on pain meds. Casanova, I really love. Lock and Key is one of my favorite comics by Joe Hill.
Did you read?
Mind the Gap is really great.
Did you read Joe Hill's books?
I'm like, who's here?
We can start with that.
Huge Scott Pilgrim fan. My friend Hope's doing Wrinkle in Time. I'm looking forward to that. No.
Anyone else here want to plug anything?
Anybody? Yeah.
When's the next season of the Guild start?
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Save the Supers. See? Yeah. Well, you announced it. Whatever. This is airing next week. No. Comics. I mostly read creator-owned stuff. Phonogram is one of my favorite books, which is about to start again. Prophet I like a lot, that Brandon Graham is writing for Image. It's a crazy sci-fi comic. Mostly my stack of stuff when I get it home is like not superhero stuff. I mean, that's part of why I was like, I'm not. I never wanted to do it for as long as I did it. I was just having a lot of fun, and all my friends were doing it, and and it was like, oh, we're a bullpen kind of. I mean, Jim was there, like even pre being a professional writer. Like we were all this kind of happy club, creating a lot of. Yeah, we were having a lot of fun. So even when I was like years ago thinking, I don't know how long this will last, but it's like, I like Unwritten a lot by Mike Carey. Boy, I'm leaving a bunch of stuff out, but I have a lot of favorites.
Well, we'll follow you on Twitter and find out some more.
Sure.
At Brubaker.
Yeah. Whatever Warren Ellis is doing.
What are you watching on television?
TV. Right now, I'm really excited. Breaking Bad is coming back in a couple weeks. Louis, I think, comes back this week, right? In a few days. I liked Homeland. Yeah, I like the first season of Homeland. I watch True Blood, even though I sort of don't know why. I just kind of, it's like, I watch a lot of TV. It's not great TV, but it's total guilty pleasure TV. It's like, it should say it's a guilty pleasure on the, like, that should be its tagline. What am I? I did watch the first couple episodes of Bunheads. I'm not in love. It's Gilmore 2.0 with dancing.
That's what was missing from Gilmore Girls.
Yeah, that
was
was
all the
missing
dancing.
from Gilmore Girls was all the dancing. I saw the Mindy Kaling pilot. And
Yeah.
I watched every pilot, and the
Yeah.
shows I'm really looking forward to are
Okay, this will be out in August,
Last
by the way.
Resort.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, I'm looking forward to Last Resort. I'm looking forward to the Mindy show. There's huh? The Reba, yeah, Sanjeev.
It's Reba 2.0.
Malibu Country. I'm not the audience for that. Wow, you guys really what did I think
What
of
else?
Newsroom? I liked the script for Newsroom better than the episode actually, which is weird because normally I don't. Sean Ryan said something on Twitter that his problem with Newsroom was the way it was edited because the way Sorkin's dialogue works, you don't generally want to cut back and forth to people when they're saying their little quippy things, and I think that really did affect it to me. But I'm going to give that show, 3 seasons to get to totally suck me in. It's Sorkin, I recently watched all of Studio 60 again when I was watching it on my phone at the gym, and I got totally sucked into it.
The ideal way to watch it.
Yeah. On your phone at the exercycle. It's 40 minutes.
Do you guys want to throw out other titles to him and see what he thinks?
No, let's
I want to see where this goes.
Yeah.
Please give a round of applause to Ed Brubaker. If you bought this, do they buy it tonight?
I have no idea.
If you bought this, you get a signed card, which is really neat, which Ed signed, and I think you can take this home, and I think you get to come get the comic tomorrow.
I'm not sure what the deal is.
It's released tomorrow, though.
Yes, officially midnight. They'll sell it at midnight, yeah.
Who's going to be here at midnight? Hey, let's play some ping pong.
All right.
Anyone who wants to play ping pong? We're going to start a list in the back.